state senator of the 11th district. But for, I think all of you all, my name is still Celina. I know that there's a lot of folks who tend to want to obviously show respect for the office, but me, myself, and I'm just Celina, and I'll always be that. Unless you try to act shady with me, then, we'll probably have another conversation. But for the most part, I'm like just me. My mom still yells at me and calls out my full name if she needs something, or, so like I'm still Celina. And I preface that because, I think that's kind of the approach that I take in my line of work, and I've always taken in terms of like the work that I do. And again, none of this that I'm going to be talking about today is something that is so scientific and so perfect that everything has to be followed exactly the way that it's written out. That's not the case, and that's never going to be the case with campaigns, because again, campaigns are made up of people, whether they're issue campaigns or whether they're candidate campaigns. Like, they're made up of people, and the more that we're able to understand the humanity aspect of things, of the work that we do, both in terms of what's being contributed, and then also, in terms of why we're really doing this, we understand the complexities of the human experience. And so, that's one of the things that I try to highlight and actually really do in terms of even like the policy and the legislation that I tend to take on, is if you really look at it, there's an underlying factor in each and every one of the bills that I've taken on, and there's a human factor. For me, it really is about making life a little bit easier, because it takes a monumental task to even do that, to make things a little bit easier for everybody, and particularly those who have been marginalized and oppressed for so long. And I say a little bit because, I'm just one person, and really overhauling and transforming our society is something that we all collectively contribute to. So I just do it in the role that I do, but I think collectively we all definitely have roles within the larger movement of work. So I say all of that because some of the stuff that I'm going to be talking about, again, is like sort of my little contribution, my little piece that I've added to kind of the issues that I've worked on and the candidate campaigns that I've worked on. Because again, none of these happen just because a person decides and say, oh, I'm going to take on all this work. All of it has been collaborative, because again, campaigns are huge behemoths of work. And again, there's tons of people that have different perspectives that really enrich the experience and enrich the campaign. And so if there's something that you really take out of it, other than understanding that the whole purpose of campaigns is to win, it really matters how you win as well. And that also is, correlates to your values and your shared vision. And so that's kind of like the stuff that I just wanted to start off with before we kind of go into things. And I do have a PowerPoint presentation that I'm going to share, because I think the way that I want to break this up is to kind of do a presentation to kind of get you to understand what the differences are between, candidate campaigns and issue campaigns, to kind of give some perspective on that. And then eventually, if we have enough time, to do a short activity. And if not, so we can open it up to questions, because I'm pretty sure people are going to have questions, because you're going to be like, well, I've been a part of this and we did it this way. There is no perfect way to run a campaign. No perfect way. Why? Because every situation is different. And it's okay. Like, that's totally okay. Why? Because things are different in different places. The way that you run a candidate campaign on the south side of the city of Chicago is completely different than the way that you run a campaign on the northwest side of the city of Chicago. Why? Because of, people. People are different. And they, they're, in terms of like what they react to, or what really impacts them, or what, kind of gets them moving and going, might be very similar, but it might be very different. And the tactics that you use have to be, different, because you really got to know what it is that you're getting yourself into, whether it's, the type of candidate and sort of like, what the lay of the land is. And that's some of the stuff that we're going to be talking about today. So we're going to get into this presentation, and then hopefully get into a good conversation, and see if we do have some time for the activity, because I talk a little bit too much. So I'm going to try to limit myself so that we actually have enough time to answer questions. And if there's stuff or questions that come up as we're doing this presentation, go ahead and add them on the chat box, because I think that is also helpful for folks, and I can actually see that. So let me see if I can actually, here we go. Hold on a second. This is the one that I want.
Yeah, just that button right there, present. I think you're the,
yeah,
is in front of it.
Yeah, that's what was hiding it. All right, great. So folks can see that. And I want to make sure that that's open. All right. So who am I? That's me. That's Celina. That's actually how I see myself more so in my head, than I think anything else is always kind of like yelling at something or somebody, about something or somebody. This was actually a picture that was taken at, I want to say, the 2018 Women's March. And it was really funny because this was the second year that the march was happening. And the first year I had been called to ask to be a speaker. This was when I was working at the Illinois Coalition for Immigrant and Refugee Rights. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to be completely honest with you. The people that you need speaking are people that are directly impacted. Like, those are going to be the voices that need to be heard. Unfortunately, that suggestion didn't really happen that year. So by the next year, when it did happen, like when the march kind of came around again, and I think that like there's a whole bunch of reasons that I maybe was not privy to as to how or why that didn't happen. But by the next year in 2018, when they called again, I was like, you know what? All right, let's do this. But you also got to make sure that you have impacted voices, because like I can talk about my perspective and my experience, but we, like, particularly for undocumented individuals, like, this needs to be highlighted. You know, this is a huge year. This is midterm elections. Like, we're about to have, you know, something historic, which we eventually ended up seeing, because this happened in January. November midterm elections were pretty historic. Why? Because Democrats ended up, you know, winning back the, or like, you know, taking the stronghold of the House. And we saw kind of like this blue wave hit the suburbs that I think is going to have a lot of implications for even for this election. The other thing of why this is me is because this actually kind of breaks part of the mold that I think, particularly for, it breaks the mold, but then it also goes further in the sense of this. For women of color, we're constantly told that we're either too much or we're too loud or we're not enough, or that we need to minimize who we are in order to be heard. And for me, like, I no, like that's a deal breaker. I don't care. I would not be where I was, where I'm at in terms of both professionalism, or professionally, or just in life in terms of like my inner self, if I listened to what everybody else in the world was telling me in terms of, like, you know, not being enough or being too much. And also because I come from a very strong line, you know, long line of very strong Latina Mexican women, and I'm proud of that. You know, like, one of the things growing up that my mom and my dad would always tell me is that, you know, I have, in Spanish it's called genio, and they're like, you have the genio of Maria Mesa, who is my paternal grandmother, and that's basically that you have it equates to not just fire, but like the rage of Maria Mesa. And I love that. Like, growing up, I was kind of like a little insulted, because it's like, are you just trying to tell me that I'm just like angry all the time? But then, like, again, growing up and really like thinking about it and dwelling on it, it's like, it's something that I'm very proud of because it's something that I carry from my grandmother, and not just her, but my maternal grandmother, because she's also sassy as all ever and like hilarious. And so, like I think all of the things that we've been told in terms of like, you shouldn't be that, I really embrace it, because for me, it really is something about getting that from my ancestors, getting that from my people, and highlighting that and saying, you know what, it's okay to have a chip on my shoulder, because you know what, I'm living in Trump's America right now. I am a non-Black woman of color who had to deal with a lot, who went to a predominantly African American high school, who has seen my friends be harassed by literally everybody since I can remember, on top of living in a low income working class community who still lives here. um and like, this is my home. I live in Little Village. I represent Little Village, but I also live in Little Village. Like, I don't live in a mansion. I live on the second floor where my parents live on the first floor. Like, this is my reality. And you know what, I'm tired of people trying to shame me for being all these things that you say that we're supposed to be and not supposed to be. And so that's why this picture for me, that a friend of mine actually took at the march, it resonates and continues to resonate with me, because it's like that's at the essence of who I am. um and it's my, obviously, like my Facebook profile picture. But it's also like one of those things where, like, every time I look at it, I remember and say, you know what, okay, this is why I got to keep doing it, because if I don't, like, there's going to be other young women or other young men or other, people coming, behind me, or even like, older folks, and people who I consider mentors, that sometimes just need somebody to remind them and say, you know what, like, we're in this together. Like, we're doing this. Betty Magnus is on this webinar, and like, I love Betty. Like, we have been in it for years together. But you know what, like, it always felt like when we were in a room together, I always knew somebody had my back. And like, and I hope that it was always the same with her, that like, if Betty said something, I'm gonna be there for Betty, like, and make stuff happen. And I think like that for me really is, again, kind of part of the way that I hope that what you take away from this is that humanity, but also that support in terms of what we're doing. Now, have I been 100% perfect in all of my actions and in everything that I've done? No. There's a lot of maturing and a lot of growing that I've had to do over the years, and I think, again, that is the human aspect of all of this. Campaigns are rough. Campaigns are rough because you're fighting for and working towards something that you really, really believe in. And part of it is, some of the roles in campaigns are paid for. A lot of the times it's volunteer work. And like, if you're volunteering for something, you're probably volunteering for it because there's something that resonated with you, whether it's an issue or whether it's a candidate. There's some shared values. There's something that you share with the what's going on with this work that really motivates you to kind of get involved. And so like, that's also really hard, because if you don't win in the time frame that you're already imagining in your mind, it can be really painful. I think I've been, like, one of the first big campaigns, like candidate campaigns that I was on, was a good friend of mine who was running for state rep of the eventual seat that I actually ended up representing. He lost by maybe 250 votes. And in a state level election, 250 votes breaks down, because there was 71 precincts, breaks down to maybe a couple votes per precinct. And that's devastating. I think I was in my early to mid 20s. It was like 10 years ago. And I put my all into this campaign. This was like my big foray into politics full time, and like actually getting not a great check, but a decent enough check to cover my expenses to be able to pay my bills. But I was like really, really in it. And I was like, this is what I'm going to do. And it was devastating when we lost, because I believed in it. We had shared common values and shared beliefs, and we had this incredible group of people that were behind us. and with us to make this, to push for this campaign to get him elected. But the world was completely different 10 years ago, as it was 40 years ago, as it was 100 years ago. And so much, even though people think, oh, nothing really changes, a lot changes in 10 years. We really have to think about it in terms of, like, yes, in terms of racial issues, there's a lot of stuff that has, like, ebbed and flowed over the years. And it really depends on who you're looking at, and it really depends on who you're talking to. But the truth of the matter is, like, issues have been crazy. We would have never been talking about and actually living in a world where marijuana was legalized 10 years ago. This was possibly, like, taboo. You couldn't even talk about it. Even though there were tons of people smoking weed 10 years ago, it isn't like people, like, there's just more people smoking. Like, that's not true. People have been smoking weed for a long time. But to even talk about passing a bill and legalizing and ending the prohibition of cannabis and cannabis products was not fathomable 10 years ago. Like, it just wasn't. So, like, we really have to always continuously think about the context with which we're moving these issues. 4 years ago, if you said Black Lives Matter and you used the hashtag, and I know this because, like, I actually I know Opal, who is one of the three women, incredible women, that actually created the hashtag, and is an organizer, because all of them are organizers and have been doing work way before the hashtag. In a while, she had been, I think, doing organizing work particularly for Black immigrants, and making sure that the voices of Black immigrants were heard in the immigrant rights movement, because, again, like, that's a big issue that has to continuously be dealt with. But when they came up with the hashtag, which again was after the death of yet another Black man, it was still taboo. Not for everybody maybe on this phone call, but for the rest of the world, it was really taboo for people to use. Now, am I saying that that's right or wrong? I'm not saying anything other than the fact that it's really, really important to know that the way that we view the world, it's important to understand the context where we're in right now, but also infuse it with the way that we want to see it and the way that we envision the world to be. Because the truth of the matter, that's the only way where we're going to be able to transform things. I'm not a person that thinks that we have to operate consistently in the status quo. I think that there's a lot of people that think, incrementally, and I'm not one of those people. I'm just like, let's do it all. Let's push for it. Let's shoot for the moon and land in the stars, which is the saying, because we don't have time to lose. But because of that, it means that campaigns tend to take bigger tolls on us. After my friend's campaign, I honestly, and I've been a person that's dealt with mental health issues for, since I can remember, since I was a teenager. Um, like, and it's typical, especially on electoral campaigns, to have a campaign depression. You kind of go through your months where you're just like, you're so tired because you've literally given it 500%. And all of a sudden it's just like, it goes from being busy every single minute of every single day to election day, which is like the zenith of everything. And then the next day after election day, if you win, you have media and you have all these other things that you need to do. But if you lose, that's it. Nobody remembers you after that day. Nobody cares. But the people who are a part of this are still there to pick up the pieces. And so for me, it like, for that particular one, it took me, I want to say, a good 2 years to get out of that funk. That doesn't mean that I stopped working. I was still working. But in terms of going through the motions, in terms of going through, really understanding the impact on what it meant to me, but also what it meant overall in the larger context, like, it's really interesting. And so it's really funny because, 9 years later, I end up getting appointed to literally that state rep seat that we ran this campaign on. And my mind was blown. Number one, because, like, I honestly, like, I eventually put my hat in the ring in order to get appointed into this position. But I was like, really, like, I don't know if I want to do this. I don't know if I want to be the candidate, because I'm so used to being the campaign manager or the person behind the scenes or the organizer, or, the person that's not in the limelight, because it's hard. It's, you're putting yourself in front of people to be scrutinized in ways that like you don't really know. I think like the hardest thing for me has been, you know, as like someone who's obviously like been through all of this now, is people not thinking that I'm human. People not thinking that I don't have, you know, things that are going on in my life, or, you know, that like I also got to eat, you know, lunch or dinner, or, you know, like, you know, folks forget that even though we're in these positions, um, that we don't bleed the same way that everyone else does, or we don't, you know, like everyone thinks that we're robots. And so all of a sudden it's like, oh, well, you know, I don't like you, so you shouldn't, you know, do XYZ, or you shouldn't have XYZ. Um, so it's always, sorry guys, my phones are like going off right now and I don't know why. Okay. Oh no.
You're still here.
Okay. Can you still see the screen?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Um, so again, what I'm trying to say with all of this is to try to give you context, but also to give you an understanding that it's okay to take time for yourself as you're working on these campaigns and as you're doing this. Like the biggest thing that I've learned over the years is that self-care. And that isn't just like, oh, I'm gonna take a bubble bath, or I'm gonna like, you know, like watch Netflix and zone out tonight. It really means like taking time to take care of yourself, because the work that we're doing, and I say we because again, like, you know, we all have our different roles. The work that we're doing is work that for some of us it's going to take our lives. You know, it's really going to take lifetimes to be able to see the change that we not only need but we deserve. But it's also okay to acknowledge that we're humans in all of this, and to acknowledge that as humans, that we deserve time to heal. We deserve time to be able to muster up the courage to get back out there again, but also we deserve the time to just be. So before we get into the thick of things, if especially for the democracy fellows, remember this, because I know like it's also intense because we're living in the middle of a pandemic and no one knows which way is up and which way is down. But take your time to breathe. Take your time to breathe, and understand and feel, and take your time to process your emotions, because again, what we need you is for the long term. That's what we need. And the only way that that's going to happen is if we make sure that we take care of ourselves. So all of that to say, let's get into the thick of things. And I'm seeing all your comments in the chat, so just know. Okay. So why do we even need campaigns? The truth of the matter is we need campaigns because we live in a society, and you know, you can say we live in a capitalistic society, we live in this, we live in that. It is what it is. We need campaigns because ultimately what we want to do is to see a change. And again, whether it's an issue campaign or whether it's an electoral campaign, the whole purpose of it is to see a change. Okay. So campaigns do several things. It's ultimately a strategy to build power, because a campaign can be a campaign, but a successful campaign is actually a strategy that then has tactics that gets us to something. And then again, remember that we build power particularly in two ways. Either through money, which a lot of us don't have, because again, I live with my mom, so you can obviously tell that I don't have a lot of money. But for the most of us, and again, like this is something that's important for the fellows and for everybody, the biggest change that we're able to make happen is through people power. And that's either through getting people to vote, or it's getting people to participate in actions, getting people to show up, whether it's digitally or whether it's in person, whether it's through writing campaigns or postcard campaigns. It's getting people to be part of something that is bigger than just them and what impacts them that day. It's a change and a strategy to change the status quo. With electoral, you know, and particularly candidate campaigns, it's to change the person that, or, you know, to change or to maintain the person that actually represents us. Are they somebody that is actually representing our issues and our values and our beliefs? Or is it somebody else that we need? And if it's somebody else that we need, then we're running a campaign to get someone that's actually being responsive to us, being responsive to the community, being responsive to the issues that matter. Or, it's saying, here's the door, we got to go. It's also to advance our issues, and it's to get our voices heard. And I think that's the thing. And again, I think if you talk to some political operatives, they're going to tell you something different. They're probably going to tell you it's about winning, and it is about winning. But for me, particularly coming from the organizing space, it's also about the way that we win. It's about, do we make sure that the voices that tend to not be heard in these processes are heard? Because I'll be honest with you, I obviously do a lot of legislative work, and this might be true for other folks, but for a very long time, policy was not something that actually positively benefited me. Why? Because policy for a very long time, and even right now, is largely written by old white men. Policy isn't always written by the people that are directly impacted. And the fact that that's what we're seeing more and more, those are the changes. That's the change in the status quo that we need, particularly in that arena. But again, that's one way of viewing it. There was, I think I deleted a slide, but one of the examples that I wanted to give in terms of, perspective, because again, issues campaigns can be legislative, they can be policy related, but they can also be, cultural issue campaigns. It could be something that maybe you're trying to change the policy in a corporation, or maybe you're trying to change the way that media actually describes people. Like, it doesn't always have to be a legislative, policy. This could be something else in a realm that isn't, typical or normal, in terms of the way that we think. A prime example is this. I don't remember how many years ago, but it's been in the past decade. If you look at certain publications, media publications, the use of illegal in reference to human beings was like the norm. That's what the media would use. They would say illegal immigrants. And there was a push, especially with media, especially for the bigger papers, to acknowledge the dehumanizing factor of using the word illegal in terms of that, in terms of people. So the push was to say undocumented, because that's what it is. You're not illegal. Nobody's illegal. People can't be illegal. An act is illegal, but a human being isn't. And individuals and people that are in this country without papers, because you're too lazy to actually describe exactly what it is, should not be labeled as something that they cannot be, and that they shouldn't be labeled as. So there was this push to actually use the word undocumented more. And again, there's been another push over the years to move from the word dreamer to documented or undocumented youth. And then again, there's probably going to be another push in a few years to use another term, because the truth of the matter is that cultural issues are also important issues that we have to be doing work on. And sometimes they require campaigns, which again is a strategy for building power to be able to change something, to be able to do it. A good organization, in addition to Chicago Votes, because Chicago Votes has literally been at the forefront of a lot of really important things, and I'm going to talk about this in a little bit. But another really good organization that I absolutely love is Color of Change. If you look at the different campaigns that Color of Change does in terms of like their online presence, a lot of their campaigns are legislative. It's the push to get this bill passed, or the push to get Congress to act, or the push to get, this piece of legislation in this state passed. But years ago, one of their pushes, and even now, one of their pushes is to get Facebook to be held accountable in terms of what they're doing in regards to Trump, and not holding Trump accountable. Unlike, the Twitters of the world and some of the other, big, media, big tech firms who have said, we have to start paying attention to this, because this has a direct impact on people, and it's misinformation. that's one of their campaigns, is literally to try to get advertisers to disinvest from Facebook. And they did it, even for a month or 2 months or for however long a lot of these different big conglomerate corporations did. That's a campaign. There was a strategy behind it. There were tactics that they used. There were things that they were doing. Why? Because in that particular sense, not only is it, like a cultural policy or a policy for, again, for Facebook, but it's incorporating people in a way that isn't necessarily the typical idea of an issue campaign, of it being like a legislative policy. We get this bill passed and that changes XYZ. So this is why I say that different campaigns can do different things, because it doesn't always have to be the traditional way of doing things. It can be used in a sense that you really didn't think about. I mean, like, I think I've had students who have waged campaigns in their high schools because of the lack of access to toilet paper. Because, like the administration at certain high schools in Chicago were locking up the toilet paper, and you would only get like 2 pieces of toilet paper in order to use when you needed to go to the bathroom or the restrooms. Like, that's a campaign, and it's a policy in the school, but it isn't necessarily a legislative policy. So, like, there's different ways to kind of view things. But again, these two different, like the candidate and the issue campaigns, again, there's similarities, but there are also differences in terms of the way that things kind of hash out. So some campaign essentials, and this is something that you always got to think of regardless of whether it's a campaign, regardless of, whether a candidate campaign or if it's an issue campaign. What do we want? What is it that we're trying to accomplish here? Like, what is the end game for us? And who can give it to us? How are we going to do this? If it's a candidate, who's going to give it to us? The voters. Like, we need voters to come out, and we need more voters than the other person that's running against us to come out so that we can win. And how do we do this? How do we do this? What do they need to hear? What's the message that we're sending them and giving them as to, like, to get them to ready to participate in this, to get them excited about voting, to get them to even want to go to the ballot box? Who do they need to hear from? Like in an issue campaign, if like, the fight for 15 to raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour. Who did people need to hear that from? Did they need to hear it from people like me who don't earn $15 an hour, who sit, in our very nice offices and who can work from home in the pandemic? Or do they need to hear that from people who are now frontline workers, because they're the ones that are ultimately feeding all of us in the middle of a pandemic, but more than likely don't have healthcare options in the way that we think, are probably relying on, other benefits because, like, it's still hard out there. Here's the thing, and I said this publicly, and I've said this, and it's on the record. $15 an hour is a minimum wage. It is not a living wage anymore. It's especially in the city of Chicago. And I'm going to continue to fight to raise that wage. But there's a lot of people that are in opposition to that. And that's not to say that I don't care about small business owners. That's to say that there's a lot of people that are hurting. And it's not okay. We've seen kind of the situation in terms of the $600 a week unemployment benefits that people have been getting for the past few weeks because of the pandemic that ran out this week or last week. And the fact that, like, people were like, oh, okay, there's a lot of people that were making more on unemployment than they were at their regular jobs. And what does that say about us as a society, that's being allowed? And again, I get it. Like, there's small business owners that are also financially hurting, and I understand that. And that's something that we work through. But when corporations are making billions, think about Amazon, y'all. When corporations are making billions upon billions of dollars, and some of their workers are not making anywhere near that amount, what does that say about us as a society? And so, again, like, who do people need to hear that from? Do they need to hear that from me? Possibly. Do they need to hear that from the person that's moving this issue and that is more impacted? More than likely. Next, what do we have? What do we have right now? What are our resources? What are our strengths? You know, it might be money for some people. They might have tons of money, but for most of us, it's the people. We have people. Why? Because we have shared common values and shared beliefs, and we see eye to eye on things. And that's the strength that we have, and that's the resource that we have. Now, the other part of it is, what do we need to develop? Where are our challenges? Where are our gaps? In a candidate campaign, it might be, you know what, we have a good solid core group of people that are here volunteering, but we need more volunteers. So how do we get them? How can we, you know, try to get more people? And then how do we use our message to get more people to, again, want to participate in something, want to participate in this campaign? In an issue campaign, it's similar. We don't have enough people, or we don't have enough people that are having this conversation. So how do we push this conversation forward? If we're trying to pass something legislatively, you know, and we don't have enough people on board to get the number of votes required that we need, you know, who do we need talking to folks? Who do they need to hear from in order to get them to say, yes, I'm on board with this? How do we begin? Because honestly, you cannot move forward with at least having a semblance of an idea of how you're going to move forward and what are the tactics that you're going to use. If you ever have like participated in a campaign, whether it's an electoral candidate campaign, whether it's a ballot initiative, or whether it's an issue campaign, you can't just say, oh, okay, I think this is a good idea, and then like the next day just say like, okay, it's done. Like, there's got to be an actual strategy behind it. There's got to be some tactics. Things have to be planned out. Why? Because you want to be successful. You want to actually like see this out, and you want to think about like, okay, where do we start? Where do we see this going? What's our end game? And then from the end game, work it back. Work on a timeline and say, okay, what is it that we think can be feasible at this time? How can we make this happen? How do we set ourselves up for success? And then this is the evaluation is very, very important, particularly for issue campaigns, is how will we know when it's working or not working? Because issue campaigns sometimes might be, you know, 3 months, it might be 6 months, it might be a year, sometimes it might be 10 years, and sometimes it might be a lifetime's work. Okay. So what do issue campaigns and candidate campaigns both have in common? Set goal. There's a goal. What is our end game? What are we trying to do? And what are we trying to accomplish with this campaign? There's a theory of change. If we do this by doing, or it like, we will get here by doing this in order to make this happen. You know, like, how are we going to change the status quo that exists in this certain moment that we've already identified that this is the goal that we want? So how are we actually going to make it happen? A campaign plan. And a campaign plan is basically a strategy that outlines the tactics that you're going to use to accomplish your goals. Again, is it, you know, are you going to do communications? Are you going to be incorporating volunteers? Are you going to be sending out, you know, mailers to people's houses? Are you making phone calls to folks? Like, how are you getting your message? Are you running PSAs? Like, what are you doing? You need to map that out. Because again, that way you can also hold yourself accountable to what it is that you're trying to build. You need to know the lay of the land. Research is important. Intel is important. It is vital, because if you say, oh, well, I've identified this issue, I've identified that this is a problem, and I'm going to go ahead and change it, and I'm going to get my friends involved, and I'm going to get all these other people involved, but A, you haven't done your research on the actual issue. B, you haven't actually checked to see if anybody else is doing anything like that. Or C, you haven't actually done your homework to make sure that maybe there's actually something going on already in this realm. Maybe there are other people that, you know, that have already been doing some work, maybe in another part of the city, or maybe in another state. You know, maybe there's somebody else in the world that's actually doing something similar, and maybe we don't have to recreate the wheel. Maybe we can actually work collectively to build something bigger, instead of saying, oh, well, I'm the absolute expert. Because the truth of the matter is, I'm a legislator. I've been a legislator for 2 years, and I've been doing organizing work for, I want to say, I don't know how long. It's over a decade. I've been working since I was 14, and I'm 35 right now. So that is a 21-year career that I've been in the social service industry. I'm not an expert. I'm not. I mean, like, the training and stuff like that presented me as one. This is just my experiences. But even with that, I have to do research. I have to, know about what, things that are going on. Like, I care about domestic violence issues, but I'm not an expert in domestic violence issues. But I know that there's a lot of great groups that are doing, work on it. There's several coalitions that work on domestic violence issues and survivor issues. And so I had a meeting with them recently, and I said, send me stuff to read. Like, are there things that can help me learn more about the issue, the way that, kind of pieces of legislations are playing out in different states, kind of like what's going on, because I know that this is something that's being exasperated because of the pandemic, because people are having to stay at home. And my fear is that, survivors are having to live in really dangerous conditions during this time, in addition to obviously the mental health burden of being freaked out because of this pandemic. Like, what can we do? Because again, I want to learn about this. And so that's why it's important. You, even though you might already think you're an expert, you still want to do the research, and you still want to get the lay of the land, because it's important. Also, because other people might have different perspectives, or it might give you a better perspective on the work that you're doing, or help you see something that maybe you didn't see before. And that's always valuable. Like, I'll be honest with you, I always think that it's better to have more people that are contributing to the conversation than less people. Why? Because somebody might be thinking about something in a way that you never saw before, and the people around you that you never saw before. And that's an opportunity. Like, that's an opportunity to bring another person into the fold and to engage more people. But it's also an opportunity for you to grow and to say, you know what, okay, I didn't know that. So how can we now look at this in this way and in that way, and what can we do to move forward? This leads to stakeholder involvement. You want, for issues, there's a good question. Can we kick out people for being explicitly oppressive, or do we got to work with them too? And I knew that this would have to come from Stevie. So here's the thing. If someone is being detrimental to the campaign, that's a really good moment for folks to come around the table to discuss what the process of accountability needs to be. This is something that I think I've been trying to kind of wrap my head around more and more, especially in the face of like cancel culture, because I'm someone that is very supportive of criminal justice reform issues. And I think that it's very interesting, the dichotomy of working on criminal justice reform issues without understanding restorative justice, because we're working to give people a second chance that have ended up in the criminal justice system. And we have to be open about doing that in the organizing world as well. But that doesn't mean that we let people walk all over us, or it doesn't mean that we allow people to kind of like take what we're trying to do in a way that is problematic. Ultimately, we have voices. We have a say-so over what we're involved with and what we participate in. And so it really, really is important for folks to both recognize the restorative justice aspect of things. And again, like, this is something that I'm dealing with as well, in terms of like, how do we then do this? And how does it work? But also to recognize maybe that we're not always the right person, and maybe we need a mediator to come, from that space to help us. But also acknowledging that maybe at some point it's okay to kind of say, we got to break this off and we got to move forward from here, because this isn't working. And that's the difficulty. Like, that honestly, like, there's no formula. That's going to be, case by case, and how, you all feel in terms of that moment, and the other folks that are with you in that collective space. Again, there's no right or wrong way to do things. It's just, I want to push people to also understand that when we say we're trying to fight to give people a second chance, especially in criminal justice spaces, it's a little problematic that we only see it in that regard, but not in our everyday regards. And I say this again because I'm someone that's very hard talking, and I have a very harsh tone, and I'm very blunt. That for some people that's not, like, it doesn't gel well with them, and that's something that I, recognize. And in certain spaces, like, it's, like, it meshes really well, and in other spaces it's not. Like, I would not be the therapist that any of you would probably want to see, because, like, tough love is my answer. But in terms of, like, the work that I do, like, it works. But in the same way, like, I'm pretty sure that there's a lot of people that have beef with me over the years. Whether or not they have, brought it up to my attention, and whether or not I have acknowledged it is another thing, like. And so I think having conversations is important. But I also think that knowing what's too far for you all, or what's like end of the road, is also really vital. And unfortunately, the only way that you're really going to know that is if you've set the norms and you've set the accountability measures. But also by going through those processes, like, it's you really got to know what it is that you're going to accept and what it is that you're going to not going to accept, and then also what are the expectations, and making sure that that's actually put out there. So if in a campaign, like, that's written in your campaign office or wherever it is that you're meeting, then put those norms up. Make sure that you're doing something collectively, but make sure that you're all collectively meeting and agreeing to these norms, so that if someone's coming into the space, they're not automatically thrown off and said, oh my God, well, who decided this? Do it collectively so that it becomes an exercise. Now, here's the thing, and this is, again, a difficulty, because we're seeing this in terms of a lot of people trying to figure out spaces, especially with white allies, or folks who have traditionally not necessarily been in racial justice spaces, or like in spaces where the people who should be leading are, marginalized communities or underrepresented communities. Again, I worked in the immigrant rights space, where for a really long time it was old white men who were leading the immigrant rights movement, and I never understood that. Like, I was just like, okay, no offense, like, but probably offense, unless you're an immigrant, and unless you're a person of color who has really seriously been criminalized by ICE and by the Department of Homeland Security, you're not the one that's worried about what's going on in the world, because you're not the one that people like Donald Trump have been targeting. So while your voice is, important, what we really need to highlight are the people that are really being impacted by the policies. The undocumented young people, the families, the parents, the grandparents, the individuals that are literally just trying to live their lives, that they don't have to be extraordinary to fight for. They just are there, and we should still fight for them because they deserve it too. So, like, it's places like that you then also have to decide, how do we move forward from here? How do we address this? Because, we still need people with us, but maybe your voice right now isn't the voice that we need to be hearing. But again, like, those are the conversations that you're having to have. And again, I'm going to try to speed this up, because I told y'all I talk too much. So if you have questions, or if you want me to shut up, put it in the chat box so that I can know. Oh, wait. Okay, so finally, other things that they both campaigns have in common is stakeholder involvement, key players. For issue campaigns, a lot of it is what's known as your base, or basically your people. Who are your people? Who are the people that if you talk to, just automatically get it, and they're just like, yes, I firmly believe in this. And then for candidates, it's your kitchen cabinet. Who are your closest people that you know are going to help you really be able to get to give you this brain trust, that's going to help you, and who are going to help you evolve your campaign? And again, your people. um, they both have resources in common, whether it's, you know, a GoFundMe that people are, you know, trying to raise funds for, you know, this particular issue, whether, you know, for nonprofit organizations, a lot of it is, you know, philanthropic funds, or, you know, fundraising events. For campaigns, for candidate campaigns, it's a lot of, like, you know, fundraising through maybe labor, or maybe other, you know, representatives in other fields. You know, resources in terms of money are important, but resources also mean people. Maybe I have, you know, a friend who does communications work, and like they can help advise me on this. Maybe I have another friend who understands marketing and messaging in this particular way. Maybe I have a friend who does like really incredible artwork, that is relevant to the particular issue, or can be, you know, they can do something for us in terms of the issue that we could then maybe fundraise for. You know, like the resources aren't necessarily just monetary, but it's also people. What are things that people can contribute and you have access to? Maybe somebody has access to, like, an office space, or you know, a studio space that you have access to be able to leave your stuff in, or to hold meetings. You know, like, those are the types of resources that, you know, they have in common, that you're constantly having to think about. Timeline is hugely important. For issue campaigns, that tends to ebb and flow a little bit more, because again, like, it really depends on what your own time frame is in terms of a campaign. With candidate campaigns, election day is your day. Like, that's what it is. You might have the primary, and you might be running in a primary, but eventually the actual general election is the final day of your campaign, so it's all out, you know, to that point. And then metrics and tactics. How are you measuring things? What are the specific ways that you're actually making this campaign happen? And then again, how is that adding up to the larger plan and the larger strategy, and how does that get you to your goal? So what's the difference between issue and candidate campaigns? Okay, with issue campaigns, win means different things depending on the issue and the goal. And again, I go back to this example. Is it a media campaign to maybe get a problematic, you know, media personality out of, you know, one of the stations, or one of the, you know, one of the big channels? Is it to address, you know, like, okay, Goya, for folks that see Goya in the shelves, the president and CEO of Goya, who showed up with Donald Trump and called him a good guy that is doing all this work for Latinos and for our communities, it was like, okay, I'm not buying you. So, like, you know, and that was a little bit more organic in terms of that boycott. But, you know, like, what did that mean? I went grocery shopping the other day looking for stuff, and like, I found the Goya product, and I was like, nah, I'm not buying this. Like, even though I need it, I'm going to keep on searching the rest of the store to see if I find an alternative. And I did. But again, for that same reason, because I'm not about to support somebody who doesn't actually support me. Issue campaigns focus on changing, and challenging policy. A lot of it is, and again, this goes back to the fact that for a very long time, policy wasn't written by people who look like us. It wasn't written by young people. It wasn't written by people of color. It wasn't written by Latino, Latinxes. It wasn't written by Black people. It wasn't written by Black women. It wasn't written by a lot of people other than old white men. And so it's important to make sure that, you know, that focus is that. Um, Issue campaigns don't always have to be legislative. And again, the examples I gave earlier about, you know, media, or maybe like products, you know, those are issue campaigns that can be issue campaigns as well. There's accountability in issue campaigns. Why? Because you're doing this for a reason. And in a lot of situations, an example is the Fight for 15. There was accountability to the actual, like, employees, the minimum wage earners who were a part of this campaign, to say, okay, we got to keep on going, because like, this is still their lives. And so, like, you know, there's got to be accountability. So if we don't do our jobs, you know, like, how do we move this? How do we, you know, maintain expectations, but then also how do we continue to ensure that the voices that should be a part of this are continuously a part of this, knowing that there is a huge terms of, you know, a burden in terms of emotional labor and not just physical labor in a lot of these campaigns. It can also include cultural policy. Like I said, color of change is a great example. There are other issues, you know, that other folks have been a part of. And it can be short term or it can be long term. Legislative issues tend to have more of a structure because every state legislator has a specific, you know, calendar that they abide by. But things happen. So we went to Springfield this January to start our spring session with the anticipation that we were going to be able to get some really great work done. January and February tend to be, you know, kind of like easier months in terms of like we're only there for like a week or two in Springfield, because March, April, and May tend to be the bigger, heftier months and meatier months of legislation that we're really working on. By the time we got to March, it was already looking like everything was going to get shut down, because at that point, New York had shut down, California was shutting down, and it looked like eventually everybody else was going to go that way. And by mid-March, the day after the primary, everything got shut down. So, you know, like a lot of the legislation that folks, you know, have, some might be moving it in veto session, some might be moving it to next spring session. But some of these issues might also be issues that it might take culture shifting before we're even able to address them. I give the example of cannabis before. It's taken years for us to shift the idea on cannabis, you know, for people and for culture to shift in order for us to get to the point of being able to even pass a bill on legalizing recreational cannabis. For issue campaigns, it means winning means electing a specific person into office. For candidate campaigns, you need a very specific win number. We need more votes than the other person, but we also need to know exactly the total amount of votes that we need in order to beat the other person if someone else is running against us. Money is a huge factor on candidate campaigns, and I hate to say this, especially for the idealist in me. Money matters in candidate campaigns. Now, is it the end all be all? No, but it matters. If you have a campaign and you only got $6,000 in your account for the duration of the entire campaign, the likelihood of you being able to get your message out there compared to somebody that has $100,000 on in their campaign is a big, you know, like deficiency, and it's difficult. So even though you might have a lot of passion and you might have a lot of desire and you might have a lot of great people that are helping you out, if you don't have the additional financial support in that way, or a way in order to combat that, in, you know, like the deficiency compared to others, it's going to be really difficult to win that campaign. And unfortunately, especially for a lot of grassroots candidates, this is probably one of the hardest things for us is actually getting the financial resources to be able to run campaigns. But this is something that is being thought of and beginning to crack this code, because it's really important to think about small dollar donors. We saw this with the likes of Bernie Sanders, where a lot of Bernie Sanders contributions were not $1 million contributions. They were $3 contributions, $7 contributions, $27 contributions. And the same is, like, I think really important with AOC. Like, they have a lot of small donors, and that matters. So, you know, it doesn't always have to be huge amounts of money coming from, you know, corporations or from, you know, like other folks, but it could be small donors. And again, remember this, folks that are part of the labor movement, those are also small donors. And so, you know, thinking about the way that that looks. In candidate campaigns, every single vote matters. And you also have a very specific timeline that ends on election day for a candidate campaign. Okay, issue campaigns should include some of the following. And again, this is not the full every single list. This is kind of just on my mind, some of the stuff that you need to think about. There's additional things that you're probably going to be like, huh, maybe that's not there. That's okay, because again, campaigns, you know, like, are not this rigid thing that you have to constantly go this way, especially when it comes to issues. you get to operate them the way that you decide to operate them. This is just, again, the perspective that I've had. So with issue campaigns, it's really in the details, and in this case, the tactics. Obviously, you need a goal. What's the main outcome that you hope to achieve? Your theory of change. If we do X, then change or the outcome will occur because of this reason. You need to have your research, again, your information, the lay of the land, and a SWOT analysis is always really important, especially with issue campaigns. What are our strengths? What are our weaknesses? What are our opportunities? And what are our threats? Because we need to know all of these things. Strengths could be coming in terms of resources or assets, and this could be with staff or organizers, with relationships in our base of people. It could also be in terms of financial resources or other types of resources or assets. But they could also be part of our weaknesses. Maybe we're not good at fundraising. Maybe we're not good at asking people for help. You know, that's an opportunity. And maybe we have some serious threats of people who are trying to squash us because it doesn't benefit them, the change that we're seeking to make. Power mapping is really important with issue campaigns. Who are our opponents and allies, and how much power do they have versus how much power we have, or how much power we're able to build, you know, with them. Identifying our targets is really clear with issue campaigns, because if we don't know who we're actually trying to target in order to make our outcome happen, you know, our goal happen, then we don't really have a full lay of the land of what's going on. Alliance and coalition building is also pretty pivotal in terms of what it is that we're trying to build. It's a building of collective power. And that's, again, important because you can't do it all alone. It's got to be something that we're doing collectively. Cutting an issue. Why? Because you want to break down the issue into smaller bite-sized pieces. Again, this goes back to the idea that people have different roles, and some people might be strong in some aspect that they might not be that great in another aspect, and someone else might be great in the aspect that this other individual isn't, you know, strong in. We cut an issue and we break it down so that both of those and anybody else that's joining us is able to help contribute. In an issue campaign, when you're trying to get a policy, you know, legislative policy passed, you know, you obviously need a certain amount of legislators to vote yes on your bill. Okay, maybe the person over there has a better relationship with legislator X, and this person, you know, you have a better relationship with legislator Y. You both have the ability to be then contribute to the collective of what it is we're trying to accomplish. Also, messaging and communications is pretty pivotal. Metrics, how exactly are we measuring and determining how we win? Is it getting a certain number of votes on a bill? Is it getting a certain amount of people to sign up? Timeline, and again, this changes depending on a lot of different factors. Budget is pretty important because, again, is this going to cost us money? How much is it going to cost us? Are we putting out mailers? Are we trying to get, you know, things to folks to hand out? Like, all of those things have to be contributed. You know, like, we got to think about that. Are we paying folks, like, in terms of organizers and staff? And then also accountability. How are we holding ourselves accountable in these spaces? Candidate campaigns, again, these are the differences. With candidate campaigns, your goal is a win number. How many votes do we need to win and get this person elected? Theory of change really depends on the campaign, because it depends on what type of campaign you want to have, like the vision and also the values of the campaign. Again, grassroots organizers or grassroots candidates, you know, that's very strong for us. The way that we're going to do this is by this reason, because of this reason. Lay of the land is still really important, research, intel, but a lot of that really depends on, are other people voting? Who is it that, or other people running? Why are they running? What are the issues? What are the issues that matter to the constituents in the district, in the area that I'm running for? You know, what is it that's impacting people? What's the demographic breakdown, you know, the socioeconomic status breakdown of the folks in the district? Like, what are all these things that can contribute to the way that somebody thinks about XYZ? And that adds to the district overview, the allies, the opponents, like who can help you and who might be a threat to you. Your kitchen cabinet is pretty clear in terms of like people really helping to create this brain trust for you. Staff, volunteers, it's also something, you know, in the candidate campaign that is, again, really, really important to have. Messaging, which is the framework that we use to present the candidate. Whereas an issue, it's around the issue. With a candidate campaign, it's about the candidate. What are we presenting? And usually with the messaging, that's where you're really kind of describing the values and the shared beliefs that we think people are going to, or are going to resonate with folks in the area that we're running. Communications helps to present this messaging framework that we're doing. We have to have a voter contact plan that includes petitions, getting on the ballot, because for every single position, you know, running for office, you actually, unless you get appointed, you actually have to get a certain amount of signatures from registered voters in that area to get you on the ballot. And then there's also a process. If you don't have enough signatures and someone else is running against you and they object to your petitions, they can potentially kick you off. Field is really important because, again, how are you actually communicating? Are you door knocking, which is really difficult right now? Are you doing phones? Are you making phone calls? Are you going to be sending out mailers to folks? Are you going to be doing digital work? You know, like all of these things have to be part of this overall campaign. GOTV, how are we going to get out the vote? Because we can talk about all these issues, but if we don't actually engage people to get out to the ballot box or send in their vote by mail ballot, like there's no, like, we're not winning. Fundraising and a budget plan are also equally important in this. Compliance and legal, because even though there's a lot of people say that all politicians are criminals, that's actually not true. We actually have to abide by laws. There are laws in terms of campaigns, the way that we report our money, how often we report the money that we get, that are contributed to our campaigns. You know, like every cent, every dollar and cent that a campaign uses, it literally has to be reported. And every dollar and cent that we get into our campaigns as a contribution has to be reported to the State Board of Elections, and that is public information. So this is critical, and it's the same thing with compliance. There's a lot of laws that we have to comply with and make sure that we're not, you know, crossing, obviously, or like, you know, breaking the law. Why? Because we'll get fined. People are going to jail because of, you know, like criminal activities. So like there's some real serious thought that you have to put in that. And then again, timeline. And the timeline here for candidate campaigns is a lot more stringent than an issue campaign. Because an issue campaign, if you don't get something done 1 year, you can always try again the next year, depending on the way the legislator operates. In the city of Chicago, it's a little bit different because they meet almost every month, except for I think like August or September, and the same thing with like the Cook County Board. But with like the state legislator, we're only in Springfield from January to May, the end of May, and then we're in Springfield for 2 weeks in like November and December. That's literally the time frame that we have in terms of being able to actually pass legislation. Does that mean that we're not busy during the rest of the year? No, because we're having these conversations, we're meeting people up to think about other pieces of legislation and what our agenda looks like the next year. I'm getting a couple more questions, and I'm actually almost finished with my presentation, and then I think we'll go into the questions. So actually, we have some time to answer them. So I will answer them, guys. Oh, yeah, we're almost done. Okay, so remember this, that the point of campaigns is to win, but also remember this, while many campaigns follow similar structures, it doesn't mean that you have to exactly do it this way. At the end of the day, it's not just about winning, but it's about how you win. And I think for me, you know, it's really funny because I don't even like, I mean, like, it really depends on, you know, again, the values that you have and what it is that you're trying to accomplish. Again, I think for a lot of folks that are coming from the grassroots, you know, we have a specific vision on what we want to see. We want to see things change. We want to see things shift from where they've been at before. But if we're not in these spaces and we don't have champions in these spaces, like that already cuts us, you know, like cuts us off. So how do we transform that? We transform that through candidate campaigns, but also issue campaigns to actually get stuff done. I will leave that up there. We were going to do an activity, but I think we ran out of time because, again, I told you I talk too much, so I'm going to try to answer some questions. Okay. So from Bernie, how do you push a friend or someone qualified to run for office? So really interesting. I actually have a really good friend, Delia Ramirez, who was a state representative from the north side, who a group of people in her area, in her community, actually drafted her. They actually planned a whole ass campaign around getting her to even think about the idea for running for office, because she was like, I don't want to do this. I have a good paying job, and if I leave my job, it's actually a pay cut to become a legislator, which I think is really funny because people think we make all this money and we don't make like tons of money. We're not horribly off, but I'm not making six figures or anywhere near six figures. Um, but like again, a group of really concerned community residents, a lot of them her friends, um, really worked on this draft Delia campaign, and they had like social media out there, like they were really like, you know, working it to get her to run for office. I'll be honest with you, I ended up, you know, I've been appointed into both my state rep seat and my state senate seats, and then subsequently have ran after both of those. um, Getting to the mind frame of actually running is scary for a lot of folks because it's very, you're taking you what for a lot of people is your very private life and putting it, you know, for public consumption. And it's scary because you're really scrutinized in ways, and not even just like talking about the legality of things. I'm talking about like people really thinking that you're not a human being, thinking you're a robot, and thinking that just because you do this work you're trash. Because I've literally had people do that. And also understanding that it, like some of your issues that you talk about, you might get death threats, which I've gotten. When I talk about immigration issues, when I talk about, you know, racial justice issues, when I talk about issues that really, you know, like again have impacted both my life, you know, and the people that I love's life, and people like, you know, that surround me in my universe of folks, I've gotten death threats about it. And the fact that there are still people out in the world who think that that's okay and that's not, you know, like that's not going to have an impact on me. Like Gabby Giffords, who was a congresswoman, was shot at an event several years ago, um, where her staffer was shot. I'm not just worried about me. I'm worried about my staff safety. I'm worried about my family's safety. I'm worried about, you know, like a lot of things, because while I might be the face of something, um, it's scary to think that's because of my passion for representing the people that I represent. I am the senator of the most Latino, Latinx Senate district in the state of Illinois. My population in my district is over 70% Latino Latinx. Um, but I'm getting death threats from people who say that I shouldn't be talking about immigration or immigrants on the floor. Is it, and that like I should die because of it, is problematic, and that's scary. But in the same vein, I know for me is like, you know what, if I don't do this, then who will? I have to be an example, because I want other folks to say, you know what, like I can also do this too. And maybe more of us together can collectively actually change things, so that we're not having to just confront these things by ourselves, and also so that we can change what, even the idea of that. So I know that it's not like an easy answer, but the truth of the matter is, you got to just keep talking and you got to keep having a conversation. It's hard making this choice and this decision. But you know, like